The view from a helicopter of Australia's inferno. Bushfires on Fraser Island have been burning for 7 weeks. They've destroyed half of the UNESCO-listed World Heritage Site. Now people living in the town of Happy Valley have been told to leave as the fires close in.
Look, we're preparing for the worst, type of thing, and we're going to try to hit it with everything we've got today. We're pulling out all stops. We're trying to stop this fire impacting on that Happy Valley township, as well as managing the other numerous fires that are currently blazing across Fraser Island.
The blaze was sparked by an illegal campfire, but it's been fuelled by high winds, record low rainfall and record high temperatures.
It's been a warm day, been a tough day when it comes to firefighting, and we have been devoting significant resources to fighting the fire on Fraser Island.
Yeah, spot fires galore down here.
A public inquiry into Australia's devastating bushfires last year said the conditions that created them were unprecedented and warned they may become more common. It was the country's hottest and driest year on record, and the fires burned about 350 square kilometres of land. Many blame climate change, but Australia's Prime Minister has rejected calls to cut dependence on coal and take more action on global warming. The authorities on Fraser Island say mobile phone coverage, power and water services might soon be cut off. Despite the dangers, some people are staying behind to defend their homes. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera.
Well, we can now speak to Professor Mark Howden. He is the Director of the Climate Change Institute at Australian National University, and he joins us now from Canberra. Professor Howden, thank you for being with us. I understand you're also a Vice Chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and I believe you've also been involved in scenario mapping. So you're very well placed indeed to tell us about the trends that we're looking at here. How much of what's happening right now is expected?
Well, look, good evening, Anastasia. Look, what we're seeing is very much according to the playbook of climate change. We've been expecting these sorts of changes for decades now. They're increasingly coming to fruition, and increasingly what we're seeing is climate change is embedded in each of these events. So it's not a question of whether this would occur with or without climate change. It's just that climate change is ramping up these events when they happen.
Well, we've been watching these climate risks grow, and perhaps with the fires in Australia and California, awareness is growing too. Are you optimistic, do you think, about the speed of change when it comes to political will here?
I think we do need to accelerate if we're to avoid the worst of climate change. And that's what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said, that we really only have a handful of years if we're to reduce our emissions in a way that can reduce the temperature going up and prevent it going up by more than 1.5 degrees. We're already around about 1.1 degree above pre-industrial levels, and at the moment we're tracking towards 3 degrees. So the sorts of changes we'd expect at 3 degrees far exceed the worst case scenarios we're seeing right now.
Well, this has been a bit of a strange year, I guess, to say the least. And it feels like when COVID hit, we were really just beginning to see momentum build around a climate conversation. Has the pandemic, do you think, distracted us from the climate crisis, or is this a potential opportunity for change?
Look, I tend to look on the bright side, and I think it is a great opportunity for change. And not just that we've already reduced our greenhouse emissions this year quite significantly because of the lockdown, but what it's shown is we can act very quickly and very decisively if we need to. And also, it's shown that we can take scientific advice on board with very large-scale decisions. And lastly, I think it's shown that we can operate as a continuum from individuals through to governments. And so we can actually operate as a society in the way that's needed if we're to address climate change.
Well, speaking of action, Professor, it'll have been, 5 years this week that the Paris Agreement was negotiated, and it felt like that really spurred a shift in the way that governments and particularly businesses invested in the green economy. Is that continuing, given the current economic context, at the speed that it needs to?
I think we're seeing more and more governments coming on board and more big companies coming on board, and a swing in public opinion in terms of climate change. And they all add up to prospects for action. So we're not seeing that coming through in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions, but I think it's the necessary start of that change. And we were talking about COVID before, and I think what we're seeing increasingly is discussions about how a recovery post-COVID could actually build in some of the good things that we need to have not just to address climate change, but to address many other issues such as inequity.
Professor Mark Howden there, the Director of the Climate Change Institute at ANU, a very optimistic professor. Thanks very much for joining us here on Al Jazeera, Mr. Howden.
Thanks, Nastasia.